Morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Carson, and I work with Design Capital, and we are very pleased to welcome you to another one in our series of Design Bites from Invest NI. We've been running these for about a year now online, and we're delighted today to have Suzanne Woodside from Mint, and she's going to talk to us about web design and planning. And I think Suzanne's told us there's lots and lots of information, but don't worry, because you'll be able to get access to everything at the end. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you could, everyone could put their audio to mute for the duration of the presentation. And as we're going through, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. And then once Suzanne has reached the end of her presentation, we'll do a Q&A. So feel free to add questions to the chat, and they'll all be answered at the end. But I will hand you over to Suzanne now, and we look forward to an interesting bit of Q&A at the end.
Okay, afternoon everybody. So yeah, just to reiterate, I am going to provide the full webinar along with all the annotated speaker notes, just so you can revisit any parts of this webinar in your own time. So as a quick introduction, I'm founder of Mint, and we specialise in brand marketing and UX. So we started building websites in the dial-up era in 2000. And since then, we've witnessed huge changes in technology, in connectivity, purchasing behaviours, and also customer expectations. So the reason for the subject matter of planning is that it's one of the most under-considered and under-resourced phases of web development and e-commerce, to the detriment of its success. So just a few points before I get into it. In the webinar, I'll refer to a developer as the person who might ultimately build your site. But keep in mind that this could be an individual developer working on their own, or it could be someone who works as part of a team within a studio or a larger agency. Also, web development and e-commerce, it's a very broad topic. So I've really tried to include planning insight that's relevant regardless of whether you're a sole trader, a large business, whether you're looking into web development and e-commerce for the first time, or you have previous experience. So hopefully this will give you a few pointers on making the most of your opportunity. And also if you happen to be compiling a business plan, and importantly, the brief for your website. Always when an individual or a team embarks on web development and e-commerce, you're always excited to see the beautifully designed site. And whereas the focus tends to be on the site itself, it's important to remember, especially with e-commerce, it's actually more than a website. It's part of your business model. And the website is certainly a key asset. There are a lot of other elements that you need to consider, both within and external to the platform. An e-commerce ecosystem includes many, many different elements, and the icons shown here, while not exhaustive, represent just some of the component parts that you might encounter before, during, and after you've launched your site. I'm not going to go through these individually, but only to say that by planning, you're going to be in a much better place to tackle and negotiate the knowns and unknowns that will inevitably crop up. However, the key is, to gain awareness of what's relevant to you and your business in a manageable way throughout those early stages. So this table shows different types of e-commerce. It typically tends to be businesses selling to consumer, businesses selling to business, businesses selling to government. Whether you're selling online or promoting online, it'll be physical goods, digital goods, and services. And then in e-commerce, you'll have different models. So that could range from drop shipping, warehousing, private labeling and manufacturing, white labeling, and what we call SaaS, which is software as a service. So the planning I'll discuss today is relevant really to any different types of web development and e-commerce. So hopefully the planning will assist you on administration and content, brand and marketing, your user experience known as UX, and your customer experience we term as CX. There's so much that we could talk about, but I've selected a mix of practical and strategic planning, which should be undertaken at the very start of your project. And just to define what UX and CX are, user experience is how the structure and design of your website supports the user in their interactions in terms of the ease of use and the efficiency of your site. To implement good UX, you need to first learn more about the individuals who will hopefully become your customers. And customer experience is broader than that. It's the experience that you deliver to your audience through every touch point, both within your website and external to it. So that could be anything from your social media channels, a blog, pay-per-click adverts, down to your emails and telephone calls. So the importance of planning. Without effective planning, you leave yourself vulnerable. You're going to encounter roadblocks. You're probably going to overlook critical details. You'll suffer from ineffective resource planning, unrealistic budgeting, and you're compromising what potentially can be a very lucrative business model. So essentially, without planning, you're likely to hit scenarios which can be quite hard to row back from. And also you can miss an opportunity to better understand your audience. What you really want to avoid is arriving at important decision points or gaining critical insight halfway through the build of your site when these should have been dealt with in the planning phase, because it's going to compromise the overall quality. And solely from the build perspective, developing a website is a little bit like building a house, where it's much more complicated to add an extra bedroom halfway through the build process. Making big changes or pivoting down the line can also have a negative impact on other areas of the website, and it just makes for a much more complex and frustrating project. Also, there are a lot of important strategic decisions you need to make around the components of your website and your e-commerce, and these can be overlooked without effective planning. So with effective planning, you'll have a solid foundation from which to grow. You'll have awareness of the wider e-commerce ecosystem if that's what you're developing. You will importantly be able to issue a detailed brief and pick the right developer. You can validate your business model and then maximize your budget and remain in control of the project. There's a saying that you don't need to be great to start, but you need to start to be great. And the decisions that you make from planning are going to give you a solid foundation to grow from. And it's going to give you awareness of other aspects of the wider web development and e-commerce environment. And with planning feeding into your website brief, you'll be able to publish an accurate and detailed document that gets comparable responses from developers. So if you leave your brief very open to interpretation through a lack of detail, chances are you're going to hit budget issues down the track, because you're doing your planning on the fly, and that's problematic. So the result of that is you can leave yourself vulnerable to receiving quite wildly different tender responses, and that can result in you selecting the person who perhaps isn't the best developer for your particular project. A crucial part of planning is it can help to validate your business model before, because the focus of that, it requires you to sort of join the dots between the different working parts that need to be in sync with each other in order for them to be successful. So audit and discovery. The audit and discovery phase is at the start of planning, and that's where you're going to research, learn and grow your understanding of the wider scope of your website and e-commerce business. So this slideshow shows the typical sections that would make up an e-commerce business plan. And we're not going to go into the specifics today. We will cover hopefully some useful modules that will help you provide the best quality information to go into certain sections of your plan. And rather than reinventing the wheel in terms of layout, along with the slide deck and speaker notes, I'll include a template that Shopify, which is a popular e-commerce platform, has published, and it's a really good reference point in terms of the information you should include if you're working on such a plan. Planning 101 is content. So what you want to do is aim for a content first, mobile first approach to web development. You need to consider your copywriting for the web sections, product imagery, company imagery, product service descriptions, and product service variables. The necessary administration you need to undertake and the content you need to provide is easily underestimated. Content first means just that. You have your content ready before you begin the build of the site. And mobile first is how most developers will consider the build because it has to work on the smallest screen, which is a smartphone. So by content, I mean elements, copywriting, imagery, descriptions, customer service information, support documentation, really anything content-wise that ultimately will go onto your site. With over 50% of your users likely to access your site via mobile, you have to think about how your imagery is going to work on smartphones and tablets. It's one of the most important assets of your site because really it's your shop window and it's the first impression that your potential customer is going to make on your goods and services. Make sure these are taken properly, whether that's professionally or not, but make sure they're taken properly and that they're clear. Also, consistency helps in terms of the style of the photography, and start it as soon as possible because it always takes time. And then from a development perspective, it's important to work content first. The website it's completely optimized for your audience and across mobile and desktop devices. If you start the build of your site without having created the content, then you're winging it, to be honest. It's always part of the process that you'll probably like the least because it is labor intensive, but you're going to have to do it at some point. And not only will you have a much better site for committing to content first, but you'll also have a chance to recognize any gaps in your proposition, anomalies, and then you can make the necessary adjustments while it has the least impact. The administration refers specifically really to e-commerce. So examples of admin tasks are merchant accounts, account software integration, legals, VAT and customs implications, and domain registration and hosting, which is more general. Overlooking admin is one of the most common roadblocks we've encountered because while they're not in themselves necessarily overly complicated, they can take time to research and to set up. So your merchant account in e-commerce, if you don't have one already, you may be required to get one in order to receive online payments. And it will depend on your bank, what the lead time is. We worked with a client last year. It was one of the longer turnarounds, but it was around 6 weeks just because of the different paperwork requirements. So you might want to factor that in early on the timeline. Accountancy software. So if you operate accountancy software such as Sage, Xero, QuickBooks, you'll be able to integrate them with your e-commerce platform, so you don't have to double input. Keep in mind that there are different integration processes depending on your e-commerce technology that your developer decide to use. And if this is an integration that you want, start the research as soon as possible because you'll also need to include that requirement in your brief. Legals I would recommend for any website, just to have a legal eye over any policies and terms and conditions that you include. The importance will be dependent on your business model, but do have an expert input just to ensure that you're protecting both you, your business and your customers. VAT and customs implications, well, especially with B2B e-commerce, make sure you're aware if you need what is called like a VAT fiscal representative for certain regions. And that will depend, it seems to depend on developing legislation that's coming out post-Brexit, and also where you're shipping from and to. If you're drop shipping, your goods may never actually see Northern Ireland. So for updates, follow blogs like the ones you'll find on Shopify and WooCommerce, because they really keep on top of the legislation, and a lot of this will be playing out in the next couple of months. Also, if you have an accountant, get them to guide you on any VAT and customs implications with your business model. And domain registration and hosting might seem quite benign, but usually it's best that whoever builds your site will host it simply for access purposes. However, if you already have a domain name registered, check to make sure you've admin access to it, or that you still have contact with the person who does, because reclaiming a domain registered by a third party can be a bit of a nightmare. Again, another example, we had a client and a scenario where the employee who had registered the domain was no longer with the company, and it was a real headache and took quite a few weeks to resolve. So moving on from administration and content more into the strategic element, again relevant to general websites or your e-commerce. What I'm showing on screen, so this is an example of a brand pyramid, and it's populated with content that we worked on with a tech company who are selling software to modernize traditional insurance companies. I highly recommend completing an exercise in this because of the direction it's going to give you for your positioning, your content writing, the overarching image of your business, especially in an era where the customer service, the customer experience that you deliver has never been more important. And it's also going to help you put roots down as an authentic brand, as well as serving sort of as an ongoing reference point as to your brand's identity. So how it works is on the base level, you select what you consider to be the pillars of your brand, and then you provide a synopsis of how you deliver these and why these matter to your customer. So this is sort of a combination of taking a pragmatic and a holistic view of your business. And then the next level up are what we call core and expressive attributes. And that's basically how you would like your customers to describe you and the experience that you provide. The brand personality, which is the level up again. So this is broader storytelling, and it's a description of your business that's both sort of emotional and practical, and it forms a bit of a type of an about us that you can use. And then at the very top of the pyramid, that's all about focus. So think that if you had one word that you wanted to be associated with your business, or one word that you could own as a business, what would it be? So for example, FedEx is overnight, Disney is magical, Volvo is safety, Google is search. And again, it caps it off with that pinpoint focus at the top of your brand. And on the next slide, we're going to look at company insight, and the brand pyramid will really assist you with that. It's going to give you a reference point for future marketing campaigns, your content strategies, and your actual content. And also your developer will get a lot from this because it's going to help guide the design direction of your website. So moving on to company insight, this covers a boilerplate, a mission statement, and a vision statement. I think they're all critical parts of to have these as part of your planning process. It's a useful undertaking for you, for your stakeholders, for your developer or agency, because it's a chance to unpack information that we tend to keep in our heads. So you can consider this as an opportunity to take a snapshot of where you are now as a business, to articulate what you want to achieve from your website or in e-commerce, and what that will deliver to both you and your customers. Once you create these, they're going to form the masthead of your brief, your elevator pitch if you need one, and the executive summary of your business plan, because it delivers sort of this sharp context of who you are and what you're trying to achieve. It's gone into italics for some reason. So customer profiling and marketing segmentation. This will help you, carrying out this exercise or exercises will help you avoid targeting the wrong audience. It's going to help you measure your proposition against your customer profiles. It can help validate price points in your business model. And it can also inspire your communication, your content and marketing strategy. So what you're trying to get to is the right person, the right product or service, the right time, the right message by the right channel. It's probably the most crucial audit exercise to undertake because it's going to inform nearly every element of your website or e-commerce business. By profiling your customers, you'll be able to determine how best to engage with them, what channels you should use, what business models best suit them, and also what price point they're willing to pay. Keep in mind that some customers are actually better than others, and once your site is up and running, and if it's e-commerce or even outside of e-commerce, it will start returning data and analytics. You're going to be able to evolve your profiles, and then you can work out metrics such as your customer acquisition costs and your customer lifetime value. If yours is a new business, you will probably be taking a best view on your customer profiles, but it's still a really important undertaking. The two biggest benefactors of customer profiling and segmentation in relation to your website are UX and CX, so user experience. And just to reiterate what that is, when we talk about user experience, that is essentially ensuring your website is first and foremost designed and built around the requirements of your user, and your developer will be pivotal in this. It's also key for the business because when done well, it's going to maximize your conversion rates from visiting traffic to paying customers. Customer experience extends beyond that, and it refers to the sum of every touch point, engagement, thought or feeling that occurs or is exchanged between the customer and your brand as experienced from their perspective. So for customer experience, you need to really consider everything from your PPC adverts, social media posts, right through to your post-purchase support and customer service. And not everyone has a USP when it comes to their product and service. So customer experience is often the area where you can really differentiate your business from the competition. Okay, so how do you do customer profiling and segmentation? The table on the screen here shows you the segmentation headings and then the subsets within them. And you can see that I've marked in some differences between you, depending on whether you have a B2C, business to consumer audience, or a business to business audience. Really what you want to achieve here is to break your markets down into more manageable groups. So firstly, identify the most relevant groups for your product or service within these parameters. You don't have to use all the definitions within the table, only those that you feel are most relevant to your product and service, and also you can create your own. Then when you've done that, you should place them into a hierarchy of what you think will be or know to be your most valuable type of customer. So if you have a niche product, then your segmentation will likely be narrower, say compared to more generic products and services. Either way, you might decide, okay, we want to concentrate on the UK before expanding out into other countries. You might decide to focus on a specific age group or business type. A lot of businesses will choose to operate a rollout plan. So rather than overextending your resources, this sort of exercise is going to guide you on how best to manage it. So once you have listed out your market segments, the next step of that is you're going to break these down further and create relevant customer personas that you feel or know represents each segment. So you're almost trying to personalize it to the individual customer, and that is the way online and digital is going. It is about personalization. If you're new to e-commerce, this can seem like a big undertaking, but you need to have some sort of starting point for your market and your individual customers. And as I said before, the data and analytics that you get back post-launch will enable you to refine those. So once you have a series of profiles, what you want to do is to create those almost into people. So I've put an example here of a hierarchy of needs, and that's where you're really trying to drill into the psyche of your individual customer types. So imagine you sell B2C luxury wedding accessories. So one of the profiles we've derived is Leslie, 32 years of age, resides in London, salary is 65k, interests, luxury brands and lifestyle, and preferred channels are email, Facebook, and Pinterest. Yes, this is a bit of a guessing game, but try and create it as accurately as possible. The hierarchy so the needs part is the very basics of what your website has to provide to engage Leslie. But where you really want to get to is up to the aspirations point. So basic needs, a good range to choose from, affordable luxury, guaranteed delivery times, free shipping, and shipping to a venue in France. Wants inspiration from the supplier, something that's a bit different and that makes her wedding unique, to see examples of what others have done, customization options, dedicated sales contact, and a premium service. So you can see how you layer up what your proposition needs to be. And then when you get to aspirations, you're really almost looking in slightly to the ego of your profile. So how you actually make them feel. She wants to have something different. She wants everything to work out perfectly on the day, to feel special and to impress her guests. And the value of doing these types of profiles is you can look at that and start to engineer your content and your imagery and the way you position your product around it. This is a B2C example, and B2B is similar, but obviously has to be relevant to the particular product. So the planning elements that we've gone through today are quite diverse, but I'm hoping that they're going to help with the design of your site, products and services that you sell, your price points, payment options and gateways, it's e-commerce, marketing content and its tone of voice, digital marketing strategy, shipping options, platforms to engage your audience. So the idea of creating a community outside of your website, often done via blogs and social media. And these are the platforms that you engage your audience in. Also selecting the right e-commerce platform and the optimum channels for communication. Some people use social media, Messenger, WhatsApp. You'll know by identifying your audience really what will work best for your particular model. As you're making the decisions, try to be as customer-centric as possible, albeit it obviously has to work for the bottom line of your business. And although the initial planning phase will reach a conclusion, web development and e-commerce is an iterative process. So you can take advantage of the data and analytics that your website and also the supporting digital channels and platforms will generate, and consider that these exercises shouldn't be a one-off, and you can revisit them just to refine your profiles, optimize your customer experience, and ultimately grow a sustainable and profitable e-commerce business or a website that really delivers for your business. I have 2 final slides, very e-commerce centric, and it's really just to introduce some of the better known e-commerce platforms that are out there. Once you get further down the planning route and you've gone through your audit, you'll be better informed when considering the e-commerce platform that's right for your business. Certainly your web developer will advise in this, but it's always good that you have an idea of what platform is best for your business model. So I'll go through some of the brands on here. Sorry, I've just realized I haven't switched that slide. So top left is Magento. It's quite an enterprise type system, so it's does a lot of heavy lifting on larger e-commerce sites. It's very scalable, customizable, but would be used by advanced developers. In the mobile space, it's considered to be a leader, leading the pack. Craft CMS is one that we use a lot. Very robust, very secure. Open source again. Open source means that you can bring outside elements into the website. You can develop elements within it. It's very developer friendly and user friendly. So the content management system on it is very intuitive and it's highly customizable. Salesforce would be ideal for those if you maybe want to run a CRM, a customer relationship management system, alongside your website, to track your leads and different campaigns. Salesforce and actually HubSpot are 2 that come to mind. BigCommerce and Shopify they're not open source. They're more templated. I would still use a developer if you were to select either of them, but they do offer really nice UI templates. An excellent choice for SMEs getting started in e-commerce. WooCommerce is probably the biggest. I think it's the most popular e-commerce platform that exists, and it is an open source plugin for WordPress. So plenty of third-party integrations, and excellent for customization. Squarespace and Wix, I admit I don't know an awful lot about. They seem to be quite entry level, and they tend to be used by people who are maybe going to build their own sites in-house. The problem with how templated they are is that the code can be quite bloated, so they're not great for SEO, and they are quite restrictive compared to the other options, but maybe not a bad choice if you're just sort of dipping your toe into the water of e-commerce. And then final slide is your payment gateway providers. Again, you need to consider your user. I mean, PayPal, I would personally be lost without PayPal. I use it for business and as a consumer. It used to be more consumer orientated, but that's all opened up. All of these on here are good options. There used to be wildly different pricing for each, but all of them really have evened out over the past couple of years. So when you're choosing your payment gateways, make sure they're the ones that best suit your customer base and your business model. And that is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. That's great. There's an absolute wealth of information there, and I think what will be so good is that people can go back and refer to bits that are particularly relevant to them. I was maybe going to ask you a question first before we open the floor, but my question is really, how often should you be reviewing your website and how effective it is? Because I feel like a lot of people, they feel like they go through the process of getting a website and then it's up there and it's like as if to say, I don't want to look at that again. I've spent so much time getting it ready. But how often should you go back and have a look to see whether it is actually working the way you want it to work?
It's a tricky one because, you know, the resource in a lot of the businesses that we work for, it's not that they have a dedicated website manager. So it does tend to be the case that websites, right, it's launched and you let it sit. I would be reviewing your analytics literally on, well, realistically, okay, let's go with, say, a monthly basis and doing a good audit of your website at least once a year. I think that's, you know, your website is, you built it for a reason, and it depends, you know, how much you want it to drive your sales. So analytics, I would be checking on, say, a fortnightly basis and doing a big audit on your website, say every 6 months, have a good look through, identify any weaknesses, also any changes in your business. We also often find that businesses evolve and it's not represented on the website until they build a new website. You don't always need to build a new site, you can evolve it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how can you future-proof your website, really? I mean, I know you mentioned at the beginning, you know, you want to make sure you leave it open enough. And is that really just an important part of the whole planning, that you leave it, that you can evolve and you can add on?
Yeah, that is why I am such an advocate of planning, because then at least you know you're launching a modern, fresh, fully optimized site. And because you've got all those planning elements done, then you have, it's all about having that foundation in place. You know, technology moves on, there's no doubt about that. And, you know, in the past year with the pandemic, we've seen quite big shifts in, you know, businesses creating communities, maybe more in the consumer space, but creating communities and blogs, and they have become more and more important. So it's not just about the website itself, but it's also the different elements that you create around it. If you go through the planning, at least you know you're launching with an optimized site. Then if you carry on, literally schedule in those audits, schedule in checking on your analytics, make that a part of your workflow. And you know that it'll become a much less painful process because you'll be iterating rather than having to, you know, create a new website every 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone else who'd like to jump in and ask a question? I'm hogging Suzanne with all my questions.
I've got a question here, Amanda, from Lorraine. She said, thank you, Suzanne. From start to finish, roughly how long does it take to get a website up and running?
It's, you know, it's so a website could be anything from, you know, 4 or 5 sections to a full e-commerce site. So it's hard to say without more information. I mean, put it this way, I think sometimes people come in and maybe expect that you can turn a website around in sort of 4 weeks or so. But, and again, bringing it back to the planning point of it, sometimes it's not the build. If you go to a developer and you say, here's the content, here's the imagery, you know, here's the overview of our business, your lead time will come down dramatically. And it's very rare that you're waiting on the web developer. It's more often that you're waiting on the company because they're tackling the content maybe 3/4 of the way down the line. So in terms of turnaround time, that's very dependent on the type of website. But if you go in with this planning done, you're going to, we've had websites before we insisted on this planning. We've had websites that have gone on for 18 months. Mm-hmm. You know, and we just don't go down that route anymore. So, you know, you'd be talking a few months if you go in with your A game.
What would you say is the most common mistake that you see when, you know, having worked on many websites over the years? What are the recurring mistakes that people make, and how can they avoid them?
So the most common scenario without a doubt is you'll talk about content and they'll say, well, we want to see what it looks like first. And I understand that, because it's the visual bit that really people buy into. So it's the content. It's always, because people prefer to see the site to work out the content, but the content really should be based around the business and the customer. And what invariably will happen is, so you'll do a design and get the design signed off. Then they'll say, right, we'll send you through the content, and it just doesn't fit the site. So that's the most common scenario, and why in web development the optimum approach is content first, mobile first. Get all of that, and it's not that you can't make adjustments or make changes. It's not that. It's just, when you see that content, you are building the best structure around it through the eyes of the customer.
Yeah, so this comes back to that planning thing again, is that if people have done that and have some of that content ready, and it is, I've been involved in some projects as well where I see that, where people are working on something and then they say, right, well, we'll come back to you with that content. And then that's maybe where the delays come in, or you're maybe waiting 2 or 3 weeks on somebody having to write something or come up with something or write a blog, or, and that is just the problem. Then it is constantly building more delay into your process. But I suppose that's the part that people find difficult, isn't it, to actually sit down and make those decisions. But the point that you've made over and over again is that if they can do that up front and have that pain up front of having sat down and done it that way around, I think so many companies think that they've to come to a web design company to get a website done, and that's the first step in the pathway. But really what you've said today is about just completely flipping that, the order in which you do things, and that they need to have done that sort of more of that brand analysis and that brand audit and that side of things before they come to you. Or they might have done that with you as well, obviously, but they need to have really made those considerations and asked those questions first before they then start trying to roll that out onto their site.
Yeah, and the point that you've made there is, or we may work on that with them. When somebody comes to you and asks for a website, for you to cost a website, they're asking usually just about the build of the site. We will work with, and we do work with clients on that wider consultancy piece. But I would say, if most of the time, if you went into businesses and you price that in as well, knowing what that takes, they would think, no, they'll end up going with, what will be a lower cost. So, that's why I was saying about working with individual developers or working with studios and agencies. You have the option where maybe they specialize in digital marketing or social media content, and you can tap into those other services. But if it's about budget, a lot of this planning is what you really need to do in-house yourself, and be able to furnish the developer with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thanks very much, Suzanne. Don't seem to have any more questions in the chat now, so maybe I'll just take this opportunity to thank you, Suzanne, for lots of really useful information, and thank everyone for attending. We have a second one in this series, which then takes things to the next stage, and that's in around September time, so keep an eye out for that. But just leaves me to say thanks very much for attending, and hopefully you'll join another one of our Design Bites in the future.